Being a girl who plays video games can be pretty tough sometimes. Note that I said girl who plays video games and not bloody gamer girl, since that term seems to be now irrevocably associated with dirty bathwater and a Twitch thought turned scam artist. That's just one of the things you get. Others just assume you're trash at the game because of what's between your legs. The only time I ever get any real respect from guys is when I prove I'm actually good at the game we're playing. Not that all guys are like that. I'd actually say that most don't really care that I'm a girl. But when it gets bad, it gets really bad. And sometimes that's all it takes to ruin the experience for me completely. But there was one incident that occurred while I was playing online that put me off gaming entirely for quite a while. This is the story of Twilight Zane. I met Twilight Zane one night on Sea of Thieves. For those that don't know, Sea of Thieves is an awesome multiplayer game where a crew of 2 to 4 players take control of their very own pirate ship. I was a huge fan of the Disney Pirates franchise when I was a kid. Still am, I suppose. So the idea of a game like that was hugely appealing to me. I had a lot of fun on Sea of Thieves for a while anyway, until one night I found myself on a ship with a crew member called Twilight Zane. Zane, as we'll call him, was nice at first. He seemed a little surprised to find himself sailing with a real-life girl, but a lot of people are, and just get over it pretty quickly. Zane seemed like one of those guys, kind of quiet, but perfectly nice. Otherwise, he kind of faded into the background for the most part, being overshadowed by a much louder, more extroverted crew members that ran around showing off their pet parents and playing their musical instruments. At one point, after fighting a ship full of skeleton pirates, I needed to regenerate some health. So I go below deck to our little food barrel and pick out a few pineapples to nom on to get myself back to full strength. I made a remark to the guys about eating all the chips, pineapples, and how it was making me hungry in real life. They asked what my favorite food was, and my reply is probably in line with like 80% of people everywhere. Pizza, I told them. This sparked off a little debate on ship when one of the crew threw the question out there. How do you feel about pineapple on pizza? Now, unlike most of civilized society, I actually kind of liked Hawaiian pizza. I just can't resist the whole sweet and salty thing that is going on. But when I tell them that this sparks off something of a mutiny, the 2 louder crew members start laughing, and one even jumped off the ship, saying he refused to sail with someone who liked pineapple on pizza. It was funny. Sure. We had a few laughs, all the while Twilight Zane stayed quiet, not saying a word as we had a little bit of banter. About 45 minutes go by, and I'm getting hungry and hungrier, so I tell the guys I'm about to jump off to go make some food, and then I'd be back on afterward. And then I hear my doorbell. Luckily, my flatmate was home, so I didn't have to worry about rushing off to answer it. So I didn't really take much notice of the exchange I can hear through my bedroom door. But I did start to take notice when I heard my flatmate's footsteps coming up the stairs to my room. As she opens the door, I slide off my headphones, and there stands my roommate with the pizza box in her hands. It was a godsend to trust my BFF to just know when I was hungry. Or at least that's when I thought. I was so hungry that I actually cut her off and asked her if I could have a slice of her pizza, as I was absolutely ravenous. She looks confused, then says she was about to ask me the same thing. I'm beyond confused at this point. So I asked the guys on Sea of Thieves to hold on a minute. I mute my mic, then turn back to my friend. My jaw was on the floor by the time she's finished talking. The pizza delivery wasn't for her at all. It was for me. What's more, it had been paid for, and the topping was, you guessed it, ham and pineapple. I felt sick. I told my friend she could have it, that I wasn't feeling very hungry anymore. And a confused voice. She thanked me and turns the leaf, but asked me if I'm feeling okay before she shuts the door. I just straight up lie and tell her I'm fine. Just a bit under the weather, I suppose. When she shuts the door, I get right back on the PC. It was horrible. I found myself asking a question that I already knew the answer to. What do you guys ordered me food? The first two louder sailors said no, with one actually laughing. It would seem like such a bizarre question. But Twilight, Zane was silent. His character just stood still on deck, quietly watching and listening as the situation unfolded. And then he spoke up. "Enjoy." As Ollie said, I freaked out. I pulled the Ethernet cable out of the back of my computer so hard, the connection snapped off and remained in the slot. But it was severed. And that's all that mattered. But it was way too late. And that was the worst thing of all. There was no way for me to know just how much information Zane had acquired just from using my Microsoft ID and IP address. If he managed to work out my home address, what other information had he been able to dredge up? The only comfort I could possibly take in the whole thing was that because of his accent, I knew he was North American. But that didn't rule out the possibility that he was either living or studying in the UK and was actually much closer than I first thought. I barely slept the week that followed. Nightmares came every single night, nightmares in which I'd wake up to a figure standing over my bed. A crooked smile twisting their lips before they pounced. I wake up crying, bedsheets soaked in a cold sweat, with my roommate rushing into my room to see if I was okay. In the end, I told them everything and they drove me down to the police station immediately. There I spoke to an internet safety officer who was overloaded with cases just like mine. But all they could do was tell me to block the person in question. To possibly avoid the same game as them, but generally to carry on as normal. Basically, there was absolutely nothing they could do. And that's what's so scary. That maybe the internet will never be a safe place for girls like me. No matter what we do. There will always be people whose predatory attitudes seem to override all normal human feeling. The most terrifying day in my life began early one morning in 2015. I don't want to give away too many details. I don't want the person at fault here to be able to gain any satisfaction from this retelling. So I apologize if I seem overly vague when it comes to describing people or places. It all started one afternoon when I decided to unwind after work with some video games. I live with my brother who finishes his daily shift a few hours after I do. It was his console. So from about 3:30 to 6 p.m. every day, I can actually have that thing to myself without the danger of him claiming it back to play Call of Duty, which he obsesses over. Driving games were more my thing still are. I suppose I'm a real gearhead and it was my dream to live out in the California coast. So I guess you can call it escapism that the idea of beefing with people over voice chat just didn't appeal to me. But as I came to learn, sometimes it's simply unavoidable. So I'm winning round after round of this particular game when I started getting griefing messages from some salty moron. They weren't happy that I was using a setup that they called op and demanded I changed my settings to see if I was skilled enough driver as I thought I was. I sent him back, hello, told him no and carried on playing. Next round finishes. And this time a flurry of messages start pinging their way towards me at an astonishing rate. I don't know if this guy was using a USB keyboard or whatever. But the grief came thick and fast. At the time, I just thought it was funny how anyone could get so irate over something as small as a video game was beyond me. So as you can imagine, I just sent a few messages back telling the guy how pathetic I thought he was being. Then the guy just rage quit. Or at least I figured he had. He wasn't in the game anymore. And from what I could tell he was either offline or had blocked me. But he did send one final message before he did. You deserve what's about to happen. Rest in pieces. I have to admit, this did creep me out a little. Although I was mainly worried about him like hacking the console or something. Like I said, it was my brother's, and he would not be happy if someone screwed up his COD sessions. However, a few hours go by, there's no problem with the internet connection or the console. So I figured the guy was just full of hot air and was just trying to scare me. And I just sort of forgot about the whole thing. I remember briefly telling my brother about it when he got home and he thought the whole thing was funny. But other than that, yeah, just didn't register with me. We had dinner, watched a little TV, shared some beers, and then went to bed, the usual routine. The next thing I remember was being shaken awake by my brother. There was no light coming through the cracks in the curtain, so I had no idea what time of night it was. But as I'm slowly rousing myself from a deep dreamless sleep, the fear I heard in his voice had my heart going from 0 to 60. "Wake up, as people trying to break in?" he asked. When I looked, I saw he had his pistol in his hand. He was deadly serious. This was no dumb prank. And I could see from the look in his eyes that our lives might actually be in danger. Everything was kind of a blur. After that, he hadn't called the cops yet. He had rushed into my room right after he grabbed his gun. So that was the first thing I did. I grabbed my phone and immediately called 911. It's in the middle of explaining to the dispatcher that we were in the middle of home invasion that I heard my brother scream something about the guys outside being armed. They sent me into overdrive. I was pleading with a woman on the other end of the line to send help. But when I told her our street address, she seemed to get all cagey. Right. When I was panicking the most, she asked me to hold the line. Instead of reassuring me something, anything to let me know the help was on the way. She literally said, "Hold the line, please, sir." And then silence. Silence until I heard the shots, 5 of them to be exact. Something that's completely burned in my memory, the distinct pop, 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 that I described to the police over and over again. Then there was screaming, my brother barking at the invaders outside. He'd shot at one of them and his aim had been true. There was more screaming to my sister-in-law was hiding somewhere in the house and was wailing with panic now that the shots had been fired. I was so scared, I just ran in my closet, crouched down, and shut the door. I tried to keep as low as possible while staying on the line with the dispatcher, but each second seemed to drag itself out into an eternity as all I could do was wait and listen. Then I heard the words that made my jaw drop and had me hanging up the phone immediately. "This is the police, put down your weapons, to surrender to the opposite immediately." Know exactly what was said. But I won't reveal exactly that because they use my real name. I remember seeing my brother on the stoop outside. His hands held high in the air as a few extremely bright lights illuminated and blinded him. I was convinced they were going to kill him. I mean, the shots he'd fired. The ones I thought were aimed at some violent intruder. He shot at the freaking cops, not just shot at them either. He hit one. I know he did a bunch of times too. As far as I was concerned at the time, he'd killed a cop, and how was he not dead himself? They arrested my sister-in-law and took us down to the station. I had no idea what was about to unfold. I was convinced my brother was about to get life in prison for killing a cop. But the truth of the matter and how that situation ended was something I never could have expected. We came to find out that my brother was facing absolutely no charges. None. He had fired at a cop and I was right, had in fact hit them, but was still facing no charges. It was all because of that video game I'd been playing. The salty guy who was messaging me had somehow found that my IP, then used that depend on my social media details, which he then used to find out my address. Then he waited until the following morning to swat us, which he did so with horrifying efficiency. Long story short, because the cops hadn't followed protocol and announced themselves properly. My brother had no idea was them. Hence why he opened fire in the first place. The cop Sean was wearing a state-of-the-art bulletproof vest, military style with armor plates. Each round hit the plate. So other than some bad bruising, the cop was able to walk away. That night was probably the worst experience of my life, but I still play video games. Whoever it was, it almost ruined our lives. Will never have the satisfaction of thinking he put me off gaming. I still play every night almost, and I will continue to do so as long as I'm able. I'm a headphone connoisseur. I always have been, always will be. I also play a fair amount of online video games. Ones where it's pretty crucial to have clean, crisp audio, and games where you're reliant on hearing other players' footsteps, having that kind of audio quality gives you a real edge over other players. That's why I had my heart set on a Bose A20 Aviation headset. They were without a doubt the best gaming headphones on the market, and at a $999.99 set price point, just shy of $1,000. They took a lot of work to afford. I had to work 10 months at a local gas station, including weekends, saving just a few bucks each time until I could finally afford them. But when the delivery guy finally dropped them off, and I carefully unboxed them and plugged them into my iPhone for a music test, I discovered they were well worth the wait. The depth and range they produce were absolutely phenomenal. I heard songs in ways that I'd never heard them before. But most importantly, I couldn't wait to see how they improved my gaming performance. A few hours later, a buddy of mine and I were playing a game called Hunt Showdown. Apologize for the tangent, but it's an absolutely terrifying experience. Set in the swamp, suppose Civil War Louisiana, the game has all kinds of monsters to hunt and take bounties from, but not without a little competition from other players. There's heavy emphasis on stealth, sneaking up on other monsters before mercilessly dispatching them and robbing them of the prize. Hence why I was so excited that using such high-quality audio gear, I was certainly to give me and my buddy a crucial edge. That was only partially right. The quality of the headphones just made the game all the more terrifying. I could hear every little footstep, every creak of a door opening or a rifle reloading. At one point I was about to ask my buddy if he'd open the door in the place we were hiding out. I turned in time to see a figure in black holding a fire axe above his head. "Rory," I screamed down the mic, as the sickening crunch of the axe packed in with his skull echoed around my ears. It was intense, seriously intense, and it was every bit as amazing as I imagined it could be. So obviously we spent hours hammering round after round, and not once did I take the things off. Usually after a few hours wearing a pair of headphones can get kind of uncomfortable. But these things had foam padding on all kinds of places. Ergonomically designed not to cause any kind of discomfort. I swear I could have worn those things all night, just plugging the wireless connector into the phone, TV, laptop, anything and everything. I was actually kind of disappointed when it came to the end of the night and my buddy logged off to sleep. I stayed up for a few hours testing on each game I had and seeing how the new headset enhanced the audio, and not once was I disappointed. I remember finally logging out and taking the headset off before checking my phone. I had like 4 or 5 missed calls from an unknown number. And my phone wasn't even on silent. It had been ringing and vibrating over on my coffee table at multiple times throughout the evening. And that once had I heard so much as a peep from it. That was seriously impressive, and I knew that every penny spent on that headset would be worth it. Only that's about the time my phone buzzed again. The same unknown number texts popping up on the screen is the sheriff's department. And on the other end of the line, a female deputy was asking me if I had been home that night. My first thought was to wonder just how they'd gotten my number. But I guess the cops just have access to that kind of info. But I answered the lady's question, told her sure. I've been home all night. That answer seemed to confuse her quite a bit. All night? She asked again and again. I reiterate that yes. I've been home all night. Ask her why she was calling. She just answers a question with a question. We've had deputies hammering on your apartment door for the last 4 hours and you didn't hear us. Not even once. That hit me. I'd had my new headset on. Not only that, the volume was way up on them. Not an usual thing I do, but like I said, I was testing them out. I sighed before I started on my long-winded explanation as to why I hadn't heard them calling. I feel kind of dumb, having not heard them and actually wondered if I'd been in danger at any point. Totally oblivious to the home invader attempting to break in, all while I'm just sitting there gaming in total ignorance. Only when I asked what had happened. It was worse than I ever could have imagined. There had indeed been a break-in. Only it obviously wasn't my apartment. It was the one above. A guy had busted into the apartment to the girl that lived there with the intention of robbing her. According to the cops, she resisted, tried to fight the guy off, but hadn't gone well for her. Not in the least bit. The home invader had tortured her at first, trying to get her to confess where she had money or jewelry hidden. When it turned out she didn't have any, he beat her to death and frustration. This whole thing had happened without me hearing so much as an iota of noise from above. I'd been sat there happily playing PC games, and someone had been getting murdered above me. If only I'd taken them off for 5 minutes. If only I'd stopped fawning over them for a little while that girl might still be alive. It took me a while to get over it. I moved out of that apartment and back into my parents' house, at least until I could find a new place to live. I also sold the headset to not losing too much money in the process. But sometimes I feel like I'd have been happy to throw those things in a lake. Even if I did work the better part of a year to be able to afford them. What makes it all the worse is that it wasn't some random accident. My greed, my own selfishness. That's what killed that girl. That scumbag psychopath might have been the one that murdered her, but I was the one that nailed her coffin shut. Been a gamer for as long as I can remember. If we define art as producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power, then surely by this point in time video games or actual works of art, maybe not so much back in the days of Doom 93 or Mortal Kombat, when the only visceral reaction to be had was when Scorpion pulled the dude's spine out along with his skull. But try telling anyone who rolled a silent tear at the end of Red Dead Redemption that the almost 60-hour emotional roller coaster they just went through wasn't a work of art. Yep, you can't. Not only because art is entirely subjective, with the beauty being squarely in the eyes of the beholder, but because the work itself fits in perfectly with the agreed-upon definition of the word. Like many gaming aficionados, I had a great deal of affection for what I refer to as the undiscovered gems of the video game world. Games that were just too bizarre obscure to make it into anyone's radar. The kinds of adventures that were pure labors of love, created by some neckbeard genius still living in mom's basement. I even got hold of a copy of the legendary Polybius reading an in-depth review of the video game turned urban legend from my website. That is before I had to take the entire thing offline. You see, in my search for the most twisted, disturbing horror game imaginable, I found something quite different, but nevertheless terrifying. Something which crossed the boundaries of imagination and into reality itself. So one way I'd find games to review was to troll the depths of online forums like Reddit. I peruse comment sections, make my own query posts, anything I could to find the strangest, most disturbing video games imaginable. I had a good run for a while, but it wasn't long before I was really scraping the barrel for things to review. I was getting desperate, and right when I thought I'd be without a review 1 week, I got a direct message from an anonymous account. To cut to the chase, the message stated that there was an old MMO, a massive multiplayer online game that I might be well interested in. The public servers for this game were long dead, but apparently there was a private server, which a small group of dedicated enthusiasts still regularly visited. The message sent from a throwaway account stated that the author will be extremely grateful for any further information regarding the occupants of the private server. According to them, they'd had a friend that had somehow gotten access to the server and before seemingly disappearing entirely from their online spaces. Emails, Steam, and Discord accounts for this person had been completely deleted, and the person had even gone so far as to stop answering their phone before it was disconnected completely. I had to be completely honest here. I didn't believe a word of the message. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And I applied this exact line of logic to the message's contents. If I could put the work in, the review might end up being the best I'd ever created. But to have it just pop up in my inbox seemed way too easy. So I asked the sender if he minded having a brief Skype conversation so I could make a few notes on necessary details. If he sounded disingenuous, or if I heard laughter in the background. I had known it was an elaborate prank. Only they wasn't. When I finally got the guy on the phone, He was so genuine and almost scared me. He was extremely worried for his missing friend and told me the whole saga. The police had done a welfare check and declared him fine even though he was living alone and barely venturing out of the house. When he traveled across state lines to visit the guy, he refused to see him. I suggested hiring a private investigator if he was truly concerned for his friend's safety, but he replied that he couldn't afford it. Hence why he was turning to me. The more we talk, the more I was hooked into the guy's story. One of the sort of trick questions I asked him was if he believed there were any supernatural elements at play. He sounded almost offended at the inquiry, batting in a way as if he'd grown frustrated that people doubting his story. It was round then that I realized that I had no other option than to investigate. My first task was to download the game itself. This was easy enough, and I actually managed to get a hold of a pirated copy, obviously free of charge from a torrent site. The secret world billed itself as a massively multiplayer online role-playing video game set in a modern-day real world under attack from occult forces. Nothing out of the ordinary so far. But accessing the private server was another issue entirely. It could only be done by entering the server number into the game's command code. The guy I had spoken to had given me the number itself, but had been unable to access it himself because he didn't know the passcode. Again, I took to Reddit to try to find the passcode. When Reddit failed to yield an answer, I tried Tumblr, but that too led to nothing. I ended up posting on a few different sites, including my own, inquiring if anyone knew the password or had any way on working it out or hacking through it. And that's when I received his message in my professional Gmail account, avoided by all but feared not by the brave. Without me, there'd be no one to say doers of evil have plenty to give. However, without me, you'd struggle to live a riddle. Someone had sent a freaking riddle. And yes, I was kind of freaked out to see it appear in my inbox. It took me a little while to work out exactly what the answer was. But I shuddered when I did. Pain. The answer to the riddle was pain. And I knew what was the correct answer, because when I plugged that 4-letter word into the command line in the game when prompted for a password, the screen went black, and one word appeared on my screen loading. I was practically shivering with anticipation by the time the server loaded in, but when it did, it appeared there was absolutely nothing special about it at all. As far as I could tell, it was completely empty. At least that's what I thought. I plugged in my headset and switched on the mic, giving a few quick hellos as I wandered around the renderings of empty city streets and buildings. Nothing, no replies, no other voices, no sign of any activity whatsoever. Just as I was about to give up on the whole thing, and log out, a voice emanating from my headsets almost made me jump out of my skin. I turned my character around to find another standing behind me, and after taking a deep breath, gave him the friendliest greeting I could muster. He totally ignored it. "How did you get in here?" the voice asked. "Not quite sure," I lied. "I was looking for a full server and just kind of came across this one." There was no response from the avatar this time, and I got the strong impression they knew I was lying. "Follow me," the voice said. And so I did. I followed the digital character through empty streets and alleyways until we reached the very edge of the map space. I was led up to 2 lone trees, the bark pale and white. "They look more like bones than plant life, stay close," the voice told me, and began to walk between the 2 trees. Suddenly, the voice's character disappeared. I called out after him, but again got no reply. Whoever it was just screwing with me. That much was clear how wrong I was. I walked through the gap in the trees and found my screen turned black. Slowly, light returned, and I found myself standing in an underground chamber filled with many other game characters. I was asked by the same voice as before. I stand among them and repeat every word he said. I just did as I was told. I was in too much amazement that there seemed to be an actual cult here, operating in a private server on a long-dead MMO. "I am the Lamb," the voice said. I repeated it word for word. "I am the Lamb. I am the blood. Again, I repeated the words. You are the blade. It took me a second, but I echoed his words. Louder, the voice ordered. I knew this was not for me to repeat, it was a command. So I said it louder. But again and again, the voice demanded I say the words louder until in the end, I was practically screaming you or the blade down my headset. That's when I heard something else entirely, was a sound I'd heard before on elementary school field trips to petting zoos many times over. It was the bleating of the lamb. He is lamb. He is the lamb. He is the lamb. All the other voices seemed to chant in unison. But as they did, the soft bleating became more and more distressed. Until the poor thing was practically screaming over the microphone before it began to choke and gargle. I'm almost certain I could hear the cutting, slicing sounds of a knife cutting through flesh meat. That was when I lost it. I shouted something along the lines of, "What are you people doing? What is this place?" Down my mic, back in my character up so I could look at all of them. But not once did they cease. They're chanting. About the same time, I could hear something dripping coming from one of the other users. I was hammering Alt F4 as fast as I could, trying to just end the program so I could get out of there. That's not where the story ends. As soon as I had time to compose myself, I tried Skyping the guy who had been in touch with me about his missing friend. I had no idea how I broke the news to him that what was going on in that server was anything but healthy or natural. But I knew I had to. His friend's mental health or even his life was at stake. And the sooner he knew the better. But when I tried calling, there was no connection. That user's contact information wasn't even my contacts anymore. Either. They blocked me or had deleted their entire Skype account for some reason. Now I was really freaked out. Had these people gotten to the guy who called me? Had they somehow managed to silence him and were about to pursue me now instead? And I was filled with dread as the thoughts occurred to me. He was part of that group the whole time that there was no missing friend. He was just a ruse to get me in that server and make me say all that free stuff to begin with. The Reddit account that had sent me the pain riddle was also deleted. Could it have just been the same guy leading me down the garden path and making me think it was all out on my own? When in reality, it was all just part of the sick plan. Thoughts like that fried my head for days until I was finally able to sit down, compose myself, and write out a few 1,000 words describing the experiences I'd had. My usual readers were fascinated by my account, although a fair few tried to call me out on making the whole thing up for clicks. According to them, if I didn't have screenshots or recording of the whole thing, it didn't happen. I assured them it had, that I was just too taken aback by the whole thing to remember to run a screen capture program or taking the screenshots. I actually ended up editing the post to say that no matter if people believe me or not, they were under no circumstances to try to access the servers themselves. Not long after I received a 3-word email, "Take it down." The words had a picture file attached. One that was just a straight-up Google Earth Street view of my own apartment complex. So I did, I took the post down. Not only that, but I deleted my website. Along with the hundreds of time-consuming reviews I put so much work into, all gone and a few clicks of a mouse. I tried to do the same with my online presence in general, creating whole new email and social media accounts with absolutely no clue as to who they belonged to. That seemed to stop the harassment, and thank God, no one ever vandalized my property or tried to ambush me outside my home. Although I sometimes get a feeling that someone or a group of people have been to visit once or twice, just to make sure they know where they can find me. I suppose this whole thing is intended as a warning. I opened with saying that video games have evolved from something very simple into something very, very complicated and deep, that their purpose has changed over the years, sometimes in ways we can't fully understand. Many aspects of human criminality have moved online, such as the Silk Road. So why would it not be the same thing for the occult? And even if they do worship something ridiculous and archaic, something that isn't really real, that might not even matter? Because what was real? was the sixth skin-crawling feeling I felt when I realized that they really were torturing and killing animals together. Even if it was via meetings in cyberspace and not in some deep dark woodland somewhere at some grisly, sacrificial altar. Stay safe everyone, especially when you're online.